Radio 2 here, it's Drive Time, and we have another Drive Time confession. This one comes from Jane. You'll have noticed that the Dean of Deadliness has
I slipped in quietly there, did you notice that?
First appearance of the week, we also noticed that.
All right.
Dear Father Simon and the Forgiving Collective, I write to beg forgiveness for a terrible event which occurred in my formative years. My confession involves a popular music band and a particular song from the late 80s which you played recently on your show. I recognised that when you played this song, it was a sign. It was a sign from above, a sign of encouragement for me to finally offload my shame and regret. My shameful event occurred in the early 90s during my student years. While normally being of a studious nature, working hard for my teaching qualification, I did on occasion enjoy the odd night out and some male company to break the routine of lectures, course projects and exams. Taking a break from my studies, I was lucky enough to secure some concert tickets to see the big band at the time, Manchester favourites James. The tickets were a gift from my new boyfriend Des. We'd been together a few months and this was our first concert together. The venue was the Glasgow Barrowlands Ballroom. James were very much at the height of their fame, and in Scotland, Barrowlands the place to see any act with its specially sprung dance floor, which would bounce along with the crowd, and the excellent acoustics, which made for a great concert atmosphere. With such a big night ahead and the likelihood that a few drinks would be had, I took the sensible option of having a big dinner, just to line my stomach and hopefully prevent too much impact from the alcohol. By the way, I should have said at the beginning of this confession,
yes,
if you're eating, there might be a challenge. There might be a challenge involved in actually getting through to the end of your meal.
I felt sick already.
Thank you for the
forewarned. Being a student of limited budget and culinary skills, a big meal meant a baked potato, tuna, and extra flourish of sweet corn. A tour of the bars around Glasgow preceded our arrival at Barrowlands. Despite having had quite a few drinks, I still had the good sense to grab a bag of chips just to keep me nourished before we entered. The chippy would be mobbed when we came out, and we needed to rush for the train after the show. I needed something to soak it all up and minimise the potential for a hangover. When we entered Barrowlands, the place was buzzing, jam-packed with lager-fueled teens ready for a rocking night. The mosh pit was the only place for me. Dr. Mosh would have been proud of my spirit.
Hey,
Dr. Mosh is on later, of course. The band arrived on stage to rapturous reception and the gig kicked off. They ran through their repertoire. The crowd absolutely loved it. The sprung dance floor seemed to defy gravity and the laws of physics, and we all bounced and swayed along to each song. The songs rang out. She's a Star, Born of Frustration, all the hits, the music, the lights, the crowd. This was the best concert I'd ever been to. As the crowd got further into the moment, the pushing, the swaying, the jumping seemed to increase in intensity. At first it was thrilling, then excess adrenaline seemed to kick in. I started to come over a little bit woozy.
Oh no.
This feeling grew and I was now starting to feel a little faint. The wise thing to do is to stand still, hold on tight to Des, gather my senses and take deep breaths. This seemed to work initially, but then I could feel the sickness rise in my stomach, and standing in the middle of the mosh pit, I knew what was about to arrive.
Oh no.
I've cut out the next paragraph.
Oh, that's good, thank you for that.
Well, Father Simon, the feeling didn't pass, and you can guess the rest. A few more lines I missed out there.
Yes.
However, the crowd was still bouncing away, oblivious to my unfortunate state, and also oblivious to the fact that their baggy jeans and suede boots were now decorated in a whole new way.
No.
Pebble dashed, I say. To seek forgiveness at this stage would seem a reasonable thing, but it didn't end there. My flight reflex kicked in, and I knew the right thing to do was to evacuate from the area and hope nobody noticed what had happened. Yes, evacuate.
We need evacuate.
Or at least who the culprit was. As I pushed my way out of the mosh pit towards the exit and the fresh air, the band finished their song, the crowd cheered and relaxed. What happened next could not have been more badly timed. As I moved out of the mosh pit, I heard the band strike up with the opening line, "Sing myself to sleep."
Oh no!
The next song was Sit Down. As all good James fans know, one of the main crowd pleasers and community building moments is their big hit, Sit Down. The normal protocol for the crowd is to do as the band suggest and sit down. Well, you can imagine the next few minutes of mayhem which took place. Father Simon, I do beg forgiveness, and there is a long list. Here we go.
Right.
I beg forgiveness for the poor souls who sat down in a large patch which I had provided across the mosh pit. I beg forgiveness from the security staff who mistook the commotion as some kind of fight and moved into the mosh pit to intervene, only to slip and slide, a bit like the Keystone Cops. I beg forgiveness to the crowds of people queuing at the toilets while furious girls and boys tried to clean their hands and jeans in the toilet facilities while they're desperate for a wee. I beg forgiveness from the mothers and some fathers who were faced with cleaning the clothes of their kids the next morning whilst disbelieving the explanation of what had happened. I beg forgiveness from Des, who had bought the tickets on a limited budget but ended up the night with an embarrassment of a date. I beg forgiveness from the James fans, who will feel a bit queasy next time they hear Sit Down, especially at a concert. I beg forgiveness from the listeners to your great show who are sitting down to dinner at this time. And, of course, I beg forgiveness from James, a great band who, during their great concert, were faced with half an audience sitting down for their main crowd pleaser, and the other half caught up in a commotion of vomit and confusion. Normally these stories have a romantic ending, says Jane. After many decades, Des and I are still happily married, that kind of thing. However, this is not the case, and he dumped me a few weeks later, stating irreconcilable differences or some such nonsense. Anyway,
Well,
Jane,
there we go. What?
it was, it's nicely told, and she went to see James, and they sat down, but she'd lined her stomach, but the lining didn't last. She has so many people who need to forgive her. Let's see how she does with Sister Rebecca.
Being sensible, wasn't she, trying to line her stomach? I mean, that was actually the responsible thing to do, because if she hadn't, it may have been even worse. And it's really bad luck that particular song came along and everyone sat down. I mean, how many bands are there where the audience actually has to sit down during one of their songs? I mean, probably just James.
They just didn't know what they were sitting in.
Yeah, no. I just don't think it would have made any difference. I mean, she ran away, which is a bit cowardly of her, but would it have made any difference if she told the individuals, actually, that was me, whose vomit you're sitting in, my vomit you're sitting in? Jane, you are forgiven.
Forgiven, okay, excellent. Let's see what the Dean of Deadliness...
Yeah, I think forgive. It's 20-odd years ago. And it was an accident. You didn't mean to do it, and as Rebecca said, you did the lining of the stomach for all the right reasons. So I think forgiven.
Okay, so it's a mosh pit confession.
Yes. Here's my problem with this, is that I much as I'm a big fan of James and all their work, Come Home, Born of Frustration, all very good tracks sometimes. That said, I have a massive problem with Sit Down, and in fact I have a bigger problem with people who sit down during a concert. Because look at me, I'm sitting down on the floor, thumbing my nose at convention when everyone else is standing up. Look at me, counterculture, blah blah blah. Well, I say no, and you got what you deserved. Quite right, you've got that all over your pants. How much of a thumbing nose at convention do you feel like now? Not very much, I would say.
I have to share an office with this man.
Yes,
Can I just?
And I say for that reason, definitely forgiven. They had it coming.